Hello and welcome to another update. In this one I'll be covering the latest updates from the front line. Starting out, there's a video of Ukrainian forces crossing through the Antonovsky Bridge here by the Dacia area here to the south of the Antonovsky Bridge. So the Ukrainian forces have control over this gray zone right here, right by the Dacia village. This is a summer resort in this area by the Dnieper River. This shows that they are starting some operations, some clearing operations, some scouting operations across the Antonovsky Bridge. However, this is still very far from the other side of the whole river line. We have the Konka River, we have all of these rivers through, and the Antonovsky Bridge is far from done after this small area. It goes all the way down to the village of Oleshki. And this was essentially a gray zone. It's not that the Russians were there, the Ukrainians just entered an abandoned place, and the Russians are constantly shelling their positions. So essentially, this is some sort of scouting operation. They're seeing if there are any areas they can use to gather supplies, if they can hide some units there, something like that. Then we move on to the Zaporizhzhia front, where here the Ukrainian forces continue their attacks. There are reports according to Deep State Map that the Ukrainian forces captured parts here to the south of this area. If we take a look at their map, we see here that according to them, the Ukrainian forces managed to advance this bit right here. So they captured the forest patches here down south. And it's interesting because they had prior to this, they've captured it, but then they lost it according to Syriac maps. So it seems like there's a lot of back and forth here, but that in the latest, Ukrainian forces managed to advance a bit again here to the northeast of Robotyne. But this is actually very interesting because if the Ukrainians keep pushing southeastwards rather than straight at Robotyne, this is very interesting because either they are having a hard time breaking through towards Robotyne, so they're taking and choosing an ulterior direction, or they just want to clear a larger part here by the minefields and then make a push after that towards the villages, even move possibly eastwards and westwards as well. Then we take a look at the Velika Novosilka area, the Vremevsky Ledge. Here the fighting continues, but there has been no territorial changes. The situation is essentially the same. As for the rest of the front lines, especially at Bakhmut, the Ukrainian forces continue their offensives. They try to advance and push the Russian forces back, but so far they are achieving little to no success. They are slowly advancing. There was this one a couple of days ago. Then we have these ones from the start of the month. And then according to Deep State Map, there was a slight advance here as well, that they captured the crossing to the west of this trench network. So there are some advances, but in the grand scale of things, this is even slower than the Russians were advancing over the past months in the spring. And in the meantime, the Russian forces here are essentially in a situation where they are fighting in an area that they've already completely bombarded, unlike the Ukrainians who had defensive positions properly set up, 8 years of fortifications. The Russian forces have instead demolished fortifications, buildings with holes in them, and all of these areas that are just completely destroyed. So in comparison, their defensive positions are much weaker. Of course, they can build their own, but it will be very difficult for them to match what 8 years of fortifications have done. Then finally, here in the grand scheme of things, the current situation is very interesting because we continuously see Ukraine doing these attacks all over the front line, all the way down south by Kherson and up north to Bakhmut, and they are still unable to break through the front line. They're unable to commit to a breakthrough for the first 3 weeks of the offensive. It's actually been 26 days since this first offensive operation started, the first probing attack started. Generally, I don't believe it is normal for probing attacks to take a month, especially since they have done a lot of reconnaissance missions throughout the spring, which indicates that they already had a lot of information prior to this, yet they're still unable to break through, and yet they're still also not committing their forces. There is something going on behind the scenes. I did an analysis on Telegram yesterday. Essentially, what we're seeing is that the Ukrainians continuously push their troops to the front line to essentially test the Russian defenses. However, they could also have some sort of info psyop operation combined with this, that they are trying to look weaker than they actually are, so that the Russian forces lower their guards. Because so far we have seen an underperforming Ukrainian offensive. Not just what we were expecting, not better than we were expecting, but much lower than we were expecting. We were expecting them to actually play this smart. But so far they have been doing this dumb. And this could be an operation to essentially confuse the Russians, make them think that the Ukrainian forces are used up, they are dry, they aren't able to launch any proper operations. Now, the situation seems to be that the Ukrainians think or believe that if they launch their offensive, they'll have a very difficult time actually achieving their objectives, the objective that they stated prior to this offensive. And not being able to succeed would be a huge cost for the Ukrainian morale, because so far they have quote-unquote been undefeated in their operations, in their offensive operations. They've managed to recapture Kherson, they've managed to recapture Kharkiv. So these two areas they are undefeated in. If they're defeated here, then their role of undefeatedness is going to end. And with the loss of Bakhmut as well, the morale would be terrible on the Ukrainian army, and the Russians would start having great morale as they've succeeded both in Bakhmut and in this offensive. So the Ukrainians are essentially in a position where they expect that there will be a lot of difficulty, and it will be very difficult for them to actually achieve success. This is why up to the offensive, we heard the Western narrative change from the Ukrainians are clearly going to succeed at this to this is not the final offensive, this is just one of multiple offensives. They're preparing, they're going to plan many things, and the war will end in a long time. If the whole narrative is centered around that, then it's because they either want the Russians to lower their guard, or that they don't expect any success, so they're preparing the public for that. So we're currently in a situation where there's a lot of psyop going around on both sides, but essentially both sides are trying to look very weak. If you take a look at what is happening, then you expect both sides to be extremely weak right now. And then if you look at the front line, you see that there's a lot of destruction, but there's no real result. The Ukrainian forces manage to advance, the Russians keep posting videos and pictures of lost Ukrainian equipment. So the narrative is Ukraine is advancing, but at a high cost on the Russian side, and the Ukrainian side, we are advancing, we are having success, it's just probing attacks and we're already succeeding. So both are having narratives that they are very strong, both appear very weak at the same time as they say that they are strong. It's just very confusing as a whole, but what I think is that both are playing it down their own strength. Both are trying to hold back their true power, try to reveal it at a crucial time. They all are saving some trump cards. The Ukrainians definitely have something that they're holding on to, that they're saving for their main push. They have a main push with 80% of their strength. They want to use that at a singular point. And then they have something else on top of that. I'm very sure of that. The Russian forces at the same time are not committing everything they have so far. They're only using forward units. Their air force is probably fully committed to the capacity that they have available in the southern front. However, their actual position sectoral units, their artillery and so on, is probably not fully committed yet. So essentially, we're also seeing the Russian forces not use their advanced forces, their tank, armors, all of these things at the usual level. They are scarcely located around the front line, mostly just forward positions, scouting positions to detect the Ukrainian forces and then launch airstrikes, artillery strikes and so on their positions. So essentially we'll see the main push, and then that is where we will see who is actually the strongest. So far it seems that it is very clouded who is able to win in this specific battle. But all I can say is that time will tell, and that is going to be all for this video. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.